Illness grief is the grief that we feel from the many losses associated with living with illness. These losses can vary from person to person. It can include the loss of dreams, such as a career or the opportunity to have children, changes in relationships, usually some change in physical or mental abilities, and more personally, perhaps a loss of identity or difficulties finding meaning in life. This video will first explain illness grief and then talk about some of the different ways that may help you as you go through it. The thing about grief is that it's very personal and that people experience it and manage it in very different ways. And for some people, illness grief may be your first experience of serious grief. There's no right way to do grief. It's what works for you. One of the key things that you may experience are intense feelings of sadness that may come in waves. Also, initially, you may feel shock and numbness, and you may not believe what is happening. You may feel panicky and overwhelmed, anger at why me, and generally be more irritable. And although these feelings are very uncomfortable, they are very normal. You may also experience a number of physical symptoms, such as finding it difficult to sleep or concentrate, or stomach upsets. Although we usually experience grief with any significant loss, illness grief is different. There may not be a clear-cut loss event, as it may take time to get a diagnosis. But also it often takes months and even years to understand the impact. There's no ceremony or funeral where people come together to acknowledge your losses and to mourn with you. Often other people just don't understand the losses, and so you can't talk to them or have a shared experience with them. So what is grief? Why do you feel so bad? Basically, you used to be here and now you're here, but you so want to get back to here. When you're sitting here, and there's a yearning to come back to there, but you can't. And it's this gap, this yearning to be there is what grief is. When we initially grieve, we look back to here. We remember our life as it was. We remember what we enjoyed, who we were, what we could do. And we may even remember how it came about that we lost it. But as we go through the process of grieving, as your brain processes the gap and the fact you're here, it allows you to focus on the present, living realistically here, where you can have a meaningful life and enjoyment and friendships. And this is often called acceptance. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about acceptance because it gets a lot of bad press, particularly in social media. Acceptance is not getting to that place of sort of passive hopelessness. This is my lot in life. Acceptance is saying, I'm here. Okay, how am I going to make it work? How do I live well with this? And part of acceptance can mean following the latest research or signing up for experimental treatment. But it's not making your happiness dependent on the success of these. Accepting you're here, and yes, there may be some very exciting changes coming, but you can make here work. It is living well in the present, which is actually the title of this channel, Living Illness Well. Grieving is a natural process that has allowed us to eventually live well with loss. And unlike depression, it tends to be more wavelength so that there are some good periods in between. So how do we grieve to get to living well in the present? I think there are two parts. The first one is finding a way to process the losses and emotions so we can understand what they mean and come to terms with them. And the second one, which is the fun one, I think, is making the present that's here a good place to be in your circumstances. So let's look at one. How can you process the changes? It's actually thinking about them in different ways from the perspective of the present. One of the simplest and most effective things to do is to write about it from the perspective of the present. And you write every day just for 20 to 30 minutes, no longer. And it's writing from the heart, not thinking about or judging what you're writing. It's just expressing what you're feeling and thinking. It might be swear words for an entire page if that's how you're feeling. It's a way of taking the emotions and the thoughts out of your head and making sense of them. And as you continue to write daily, you may find that you start to look at your situation with less emotion and become more problem solving as you bring in other parts of your brain. And it's this process that allows your brain to process that you have moved from here to here. And that then allows you to let go of the focus on what you've lost. It can be very emotional to write. So you might like to try for maybe 5 to 10 minutes and see how you feel and if it's helpful for you. And if there's trauma associated with your illness in some way, then please check with your doctor about whether writing would be helpful for you, because it can sometimes trigger flashbacks to a traumatic situation. Your writing may shock you at first because it's uncensored, and it's very different to what we say to friends. To a friend you may say, "Oh, I don't like this situation, it's challenging, I'm not that happy." But we don't normally give them 20 minutes of swear words in some sort of rant. If you're more visual, then it's useful to experiment with drawing. And other creative ways of expressing your feelings and thoughts are perhaps a letter that you don't send, or poetry. It is whatever works for you. Talking to people is another way of processing the changes. It's very comforting to be able to talk to someone else who understands how you're feeling and what you're going through. And even to laugh about some of the situations your symptoms, such as brain fog, may have got you into. Patient groups can be a really useful way of finding people to talk to or write to. But just be a little careful. At times you may find that you yourself don't have the energy to take on someone else's losses. And it's choosing wisely the level of your involvement to match it with where you're at. Maybe later, when you've been able to process the changes and develop a life for yourself, it might be then that you can then help others who are new to the group. And the second part of grieving is building up the present so it has meaning, it's enjoyable, gives you social connection in a way that suits your circumstances. It's about making this good. And this brings up one of the challenges of illness grief. And that is that you are trying to cope with really major changes in your life, whilst at the same time you're feeling unwell. You may feel exhausted and you may also have pain. So it's taking very small steps and trusting that the process will eventually lead to you building a good life here. For example, if somebody suggests something that normally you just wouldn't do, maybe consider giving it a try and seeing what it's like. Or perhaps you could look at doing something you used to enjoy differently. Or maybe start to notice what else you have in your life that you could use or give you pleasure. If you like other people's stories, it might be helpful to see documentaries or read books about other people's experiences of living with illness. But just be a little bit careful, because some of them are a bit sort of airbrushed. They're rather upbeat and not realistic. These are some thoughts, but it's about choosing what works for you. And I said earlier that I think it's this second part that can be fun. And the reason for this is, although there are difficulties, ultimately you're in control of building your life. And it's an opportunity to explore new things or even look at things you may not have had time to do before. Or maybe just your illness experience allows you to look at things differently. It can be fun to explore these and create new things in your life and a new way of living. While you're exploring new ways of living in the present, what can happen is that you compare it with the past. But I used to. And it's really hard not to do this. But the comparison stops you from living in the present and trying and enjoying new things. When the thought comes, but I used to, it can help to notice the thought and then put it to one side and really actively focus on what you're doing in the present. And as you go through your grieving, this will become easier as you start to focus on your current life. And you may find days where you feel that you are trying so hard, but nothing is changing. Or you feel you can't cope, or that nobody understands you. And this is grieving. It comes in waves with good and bad days, but it does progress. It's helpful to have some rescue remedies for those bad days. These can be films or books you like to read and distract yourself, special music, a list of people you can ring, a particular walk or comfort food, and so on. Because it can be very hard to do things on bad days, it can be helpful to have things ready or a list of things to do. This, as always, is an informal chat about some things that could be helpful. It is not intended as a substitute for your personal medical care. And if you're finding it really difficult to deal with the feelings of sadness, or you find it difficult to enjoy anything, or you're feeling just hopeless, it's important to talk to your doctor about it. So, if you've done all this, does this mean that you finish grieving? That you wake up one morning here and that's the end of it? You're not going to feel sad anymore? Unfortunately, no. That isn't how grief works. Yes, we do get to a stage where we live in the present, enjoying things with meaningful, worthwhile lives. But something can still trigger that sense of loss again, that intense sadness, and remind you that you're here and not here. Maybe one of your friends suddenly gets a promotion that you know you could have got, or you just can't get to a family celebration. Sometimes it can be something small and unexpected that causes that wave of grief. A slight digression in a personal example. I have very strong connections with Greece, but I haven't been there for a number of years due to work and then COVID and then long COVID. And this year, a lot of people have gone to Greece. I felt okay when my Greek activities were put on hold for a couple of months because everybody had gone to Greece. I felt okay when my friends went to Greece and sent photos. And then I went to my hairdresser, who has no connection with Greece. And as I walked in, he said to me, "Oh, guess what? I was in Greece last week on a modelling assignment." And for some reason, that was the trigger that brought that sense of yearning and wanting to be in Greece and the sadness. And that's how it happens. But it's actually very different to how we feel in the beginning. And you can think of it as a spiral staircase. This is where you initially felt the grief, when it was overwhelming in the beginning. But since then, you've processed it and done a lot of things to change your present life. So when you come back to this point, you're actually higher here, and it feels different, and it doesn't last as long. You've got better skills and you've got more things going on in your present life. And in the same way, it's how you manage new losses. This has been a short overview of illness grief. Please let me know in the comments if you'd like me to make more detailed videos about some of the topics I've mentioned. And you might also like to share your own experiences and what helped you for other people. And please like and share if this video has been helpful for you so that it reaches other people. And if you'd like to be notified about new videos, please subscribe.